Hi everyone, Nigel Saunders here. Welcome to part 2 of working on my larch forest. I'm going to start today by thinking about the composition. Many times with your bonsai trees, you see the tree year after year after year, and you don't really get a fresh look at the design of the tree or the composition of the forest. So one trick you can do is you can take a photograph of your tree, bring it into a photo editor software, and flip the image around so you get a mirror image of your forest or your tree, and it kind of gives you a fresh look at the composition and the branch structure and everything. It's like seeing the forest for the first time once again. So I did that. I took a photograph of this forest. I brought it into my photo editor software, GIMP, which is a free one you can use, and I flipped the image. So let's have a look at the results. Here's a look at the forest, a photograph of it, and I kind of blacked out the background quickly to make it less distracting. So next I will flip the picture around. So there it is flipped around, and it's kind of shocking seeing it for the first time like this. It's very triangular shaped, and right now in this picture the right hand side looks a little short and cut off. That's my initial impression. I like everything else. I like the left hand side, looks really good, but the right hand side just looks a little cut off. It looks like it needs a little longer pot and maybe a tree or something to kind of fill out that triangular form. So the next photograph, I extended the pot and I added a tree. So you can see it looks more triangular and it looks quite well balanced. And my thought is maybe it's too balanced. It's too symmetrical looking. So I brought the pot in a little tighter, moved that outer tree in on the right hand side to kind of still have some of that asymmetry in the triangular profile of the forest. And I think this looks really good. I'd be very, very happy to have this composition. So the next photograph, I took this picture, which I like, and I flipped it around again to the normal view. And there's kind of my design goals for the forest, I think. So that's with the slightly longer pot, another tree added to the left-hand side. And I think that looks really good. It looks well balanced, but still kind of asymmetrical. And maybe the pot doesn't have to be quite that long. It could be a little shorter, but I think adding that other tree there helps kind of fill out the composition a bit. I found that exercise very interesting. It gave me a fresh perspective of the composition of this forest. So in that photo mock-up, I added another tree. And if I want to do that in the future, I have those 2 larches of zins that I'm working on that I could use one of them to add to the composition. Here's a look at the 2 trees of zins that I'm training in a similar style to this forest planting. So these trees don't have much branch structure at the moment, but I could see maybe in a year or 2, if I wanted to add another tree to the forest composition, I could choose one of these 2 trees here, see how it looks, and add it. At the present time, my larch forest is planted in a mica pot, and these mica pots are very practical. They'll never break. It'll outlast me. You don't have to worry about chipping them or anything, or cracking in frost. So they're very practical pots to plant hardy trees in. So if I wanted to extend out the left-hand side of the forest here and add another tree, I would have to find a slightly larger pot. So I'll keep my eyes out for a nice ceramic pot for this forest. They're really hard to get here in Ontario, Canada. But I'll keep my eyes open for one, and you never know, maybe someday this forest will get planted in a ceramic pot. I left off in part 1 of this series by cleaning up the needles on the forest floor. It's a big job. There was a lot of needles that fell down and fall. So I would say I'm about 80% there now. I've been working on it for a few hours this morning. So my next task after the needle cleanup will be to clean up the trunks of the trees, getting rid of all the moss that's growing near the base. Here's a look at the forest floor now. So you can see a lot of it's cleaned up of all those needles. I just have a few more to go towards the back of the planting, and then I can start removing this moss that's growing up the base of all the trees. If you don't remove this moss, it traps moisture and you can get your bark rotting away. So you'll get like an undercut where the bark is kind of rotted away. This moss won't kill the tree or anything. It just, this bark is dead, the outer layer of bark. And if the moss keeps the moisture there, that dead layer of bark can rot away. So it's nice to have, your root spread and your lower trunk to have the same kind of bark as the tree. I've been working away at the landscape for a couple of hours now, picking out all the needles that have fallen down, and it really makes a difference. It makes the landscape look more miniature. And as I've said before, the more I clean out the landscape, the more, you notice the odd needle in that. It becomes very apparent. So, yeah, I'm just working away. I'm getting close to finishing the needle plucking off the landscape. It's, I would say I'm 90 to 95% done now. I've been working away for another hour, and I've got pretty well all the needles cleaned up on the landscape, and it makes a big difference. I think it's time well spent. It cleans it up, gets it ready for spring. So my next step is to clean up the moss around the base of all the trees. Here's a look at some of that moss climbing up the base of the trees, so I just pick it off with the tweezers. And it's just something you have to keep in check. You just, whenever you notice it climbing up the trunk, you just get out the tweezers and the toothbrush and just clean it off. And that'll keep your bark looking good. And I know a lot of people like the moss climbing up the trunks. It looks kind of quite authentic for a forest. It looks kind of like a rainforest, but it can also, as I said, it can soften that bark and rot away your bark. So it's better to clean it off. And if you want, to put it in a show with moss climbing up the trunk, well, you can do that. It's just after the show I would clean it off. So I'll work away. I've got a lot of trees to do. I'll just work away, picking the moss off the trunks. I used the tweezers and picked away all the moss around the base of the trees. So now I'm going to come in with my toothbrush and just scrub the algae and any remnants of the moss off. Just kind of cleaning up those lower trunks. You don't have to get them 100% clean. I mean, a little algae's okay. Yeah, that one's looking pretty good now. I've got the trunks cleaned up, so you can see by how wet the bark is how much moisture was in that moss. All the trees are like that. My next step for the forest is to clean up all the weeds. I don't have a lot of weeds, thank goodness, but I do have some liverwort that's forming, just little pieces. So I'm going to pick all those out so it stops it spreading throughout the summer. So in here I can see plates of liverwort forming. So I'll pick all that out. And it's hard to get rid of liverwort. You can pick it all out and then you look again and it's starting to come back. But it's just something you just have to keep at. The more you pick out, the less of a problem it becomes. And maybe eventually you can eliminate it. It's pretty tough though. Always seems to come back. The worst part is when it starts growing in amongst the moss. It's hard to separate. So you just got to go in and kind of pick a chunk of it out. I have weeded the landscape. So everything I do to it, it gets just a little bit better. So my next step is to prune up the moss. It's getting quite fluffy in sections. I'm losing some definition in some of my moss bushes. And this moss, you know, if you leave it alone, it'll just keep growing thicker and thicker throughout the summer. So I need to prune it all back now so it can grow a bit and green up and look good for spring. I just noticed that it's getting late in the afternoon. It's getting a little dark out and a little hard to see now. So I'm going to leave the moss pruning and the critique for tomorrow's video, part 3 of this series. So I've made a lot of progress on this forest in the last 2 days. It's been a lot of work, but it's always worth it in the end when you stand back and look at the forest and you go, wow, that's nice. So, yeah, I guess part 3 will come tomorrow.